In Classic Era, TBC, Wrath of the Lich King coming soon, hopefully, or even Retail, there's 3 important decisions to make when you're creating your character. What faction? Do you go Horde or do you go Alliance? In this video, we're going to assume you're going Horde. And then you've got 2 other important choices to make. Which class do you want to play, and which race is available to that class? Believe it or not, which race you pick does make a big difference. It can yield more DPS, more HPS in PvE, or even a bigger advantage when it comes to PvP. We are focusing on Horde today, but if you haven't seen my Alliance video regarding all changes to racials from TBC to Wrath for the Alliance, then check that out. I'll put a link in the description and up the top now, but let's get into it. When it comes to races in Wrath, there has been some significant changes, and even some of the subtle changes that we're going to talk about today are still quite impactful. So no fluff, let's start with Blood Elf. When it comes to Blood Elves in TBC, you've got Enchanting Skill increased by 10, Arcane Affinity. You still get that in Wrath of the Lich King, so no change to any race when it comes to profession bonuses. But what you do have in TBC is Mana Tap, which, going by level 1, reduces the target's mana by 51 and charges you with arcane energy for 10 minutes. This effect stacks up to 3 times. Now, as you know, this ability synergizes with Arcane Torrent, where for each charge of Mana Tap, you gain X amount of mana, which also does a silence to all enemies within 8 yards for 2 seconds. In Wrath of the Lich King, you no longer get Mana Tap. Instead, you've still got Arcane Torrent on a 2-minute cooldown, but it silences all enemies within 8 yards for 2 seconds, exactly the same, but it also restores 8% of your mana. So this is a flat 8% no matter what level you are. Non-player victim spellcasting is also interrupted for 3 seconds. Now this is interesting because there's certain mobs that shouldn't be interrupted, but they can be silenced with this. Outside of this, you get magic resistance, which increases all resistances by 5, whereas in Wrath of the Lich King, this has actually changed to reduce the chance you'll be hit by all spells by 2%. What this basically means is when you've got the races that get an individual school of magic that they get that 10 resistance bonus to, they get their chance of being hit by those spells reduced by 2%. As a Blood Elf, you actually get that 2% less spell chance hit from all schools for 5 resistance to all schools from TBC. So you actually double down on that, which will be more interesting as we go along because you'll understand what I mean. That really is the Blood Elf from TBC to Wrath. Let's move on. What I should probably say at this point before we do move on to the next race is that even though it doesn't look like you're getting a lot, that silence, especially in AoE silence, is incredibly strong. So, for example, for a prop paladin as a tank, being able to AoE silence everything around you, or for PvP, and getting that 8% mana back. So as a caster, being able to get 8% mana back is strong, but you've got to remember mana issues do... I'm not going to say they're eliminated with Wrath of the Lich King, but they are less of an issue. So the 8% mana from a PvE perspective is not going to outweigh extra haste as a troll or extra spell power and attack power as an orc, which we're going to get onto those. Now, orc is quite an interesting one. You still get axe specialization, which increases your expertise with axes and 2-handed axes by 5, whereas in Wrath of the Lich King, apparently, fist weapons become axes as well, which is a bit weird. But anyway, you still get 5 with your 2-handed axes and your 1-handed axes, but you also get 5 expertise with fist weapons now. So you can sort of see how this is particularly useful for enhancement shamans. I'd say probably enhancement shamans more than anything else. Yes, you can use fist weapons as a combat rogue, for example, but it does feel like, for me, the change was, I would say, mainly for shamans. In TBC, you have Command, which is your damage dealt by hunters and warlock pets increased by 5%. You still get that in Wrath of the Lich King, but it just is flat out pets. That's because this will increase DK pet damage as well. Hardiness is still there, but it's changed quite drastically, I would say. So hardiness in TBC has a chance to resist stun effects by 15%. So that's a chance to actually not get stunned at all. Whereas in Wrath of the Lich King, it's the duration of stun effects is reduced by 15%. Which, don't get me wrong, it's still nice, but what would you rather, 15% less duration or 15% chance to flat out not get stunned? To me, that feels like quite a heavy nerf. And then let's face it, the big one that you're really bothered about is Blood Fury. So Blood Fury, I'm doing this specifically on a shaman at the moment so you can see the attack power and the spell power gain, because as you know, in TBC this was split. So if you create a rogue, you only see the attack power. If you create a warlock, you only see the spell power. But it increases your melee attack power by 6 and your damage and healing from spells and effects by 5, and it reduces healing done to you by 50%. Now, in Wrath of the Lich King, it's exactly the same, apart from you no longer get the reduction in healing effects. But the way the numbers still work is pretty much the same. So scaling it to the closest whole number, you're basically saying 2 times your level you get a spell power, and 4 times your level you get as attack power. Obviously, doesn't reflect very well at level 1, but it will reflect nice enough if I show you a level 68 Shaman. So we're getting 274 attack power and 139 spell power. If we revert to the trusty calculator and we was to do 274 divided by 68, which is what we are, you can see you're getting roughly 4 attack power per level. And then if we look at 139 by 68, you can see we're getting roughly 2 per level at level 68, and it goes all the way up to 80. Let's move on to the Tauren. Tauren's quite boring because it's barely changed, but cultivation, your herbalism skill increased by 15. You get that in TBC at the moment. In Wrath of the Lich King, you still get your 15 in herbalism. Great stuff. Endurance in TBC increases your total health by 5%. Now, this is quite a big change because in Wrath of the Lich King, it increases your base health by 5%, which this works out to be just over 400. I think it's around 408 HP that it gives you. So it's still substantial enough. You know, it's a good enough amount of health maybe to go a Tauren warrior as a tank, 400 health. It's not to be laughed at, but it's still quite a boring racial. Nature resistance, where you get your resistance increased by 10 for nature spells, is now just like all the other races, where it reduces the chance you'll be hit by nature spells by 2%. And then War Stomp in TBC, on half a second cast on a 2-minute cooldown, stuns up to 5 enemies within 8 yards for 2 seconds. In Wrath of the Lich King, nothing's changed. Tauren's almost as boring as Gnome was for Alliance, where practically nothing had changed. On to the next race. Troll is probably one of the more exciting ones, although not overly exciting still, but Beast Slaying. So damage versus Beast increased by 5%. This is your TBC racial. In Wrath of the Lich King, it's exactly the same. Throwing specialization in TBC, where your chance to critically hit with throwing weapons is increased by 1%. In Wrath of the Lich King, it's exactly the same. Sorry, I can't help but laugh. It will get better. Regeneration in TBC, where your health regeneration rate is increased by 10%. 10% of total health regen may continue during combat, so that's TBC. In Wrath of the Lich King, it's exactly the same. Oh man, seriously. Bow specialization, where your chance to critically hit with bows is increased by 1%. You get it. All right, it's exactly the same. Let's move on to an addition that came in Wrath of the Lich King. So the Voodoo Shuffle Mon. All right, it doesn't say Mon, but I needed to say it anyway. It reduces the duration of all movement, impairing effects by 15%. Trolls be flipping out, Mon. See, now you know why I wanted to say Mon at the end. But yeah, so 15% duration in movement impairing effects. Like a reduction in it is nice, especially for PvP. But again, even in PvE, certain circumstances where this could be quite cool. And then finally, Berserking. So at the moment in TBC, it increases your casting and attack speed by 10 to 30%. At full health, the speed is increased by 10%, with a greater effect up to 30% if you're badly hurt when you activate Berserking. You no longer need to worry about your health to get maximum benefit from this, because in Wrath of the Lich King, it just flat out increases your attack and casting speed by 20% for 10 seconds, but still on a 3-minute cooldown. Now, an interesting thing to think about here is Orc. So we've already looked at Orc, and you're getting that extra attack power, that extra spell power, but that does not scale. Now, the more gear you get, the faster you're attacking or the faster you're casting does scale. So it normally works out quite early on in expansion. So quite early on in Wrath of the Lich King in Tier 7, Orc will probably pull ahead slightly. But as you start to get more gear, higher levels of haste, etc., Troll will end up being BIS for more or less all DPS classes that can play a Troll in Wrath of the Lich King. So if you're just worried about an early gain, then Orc is probably the way to go. Or if you like the Orc aesthetic. But actually for maximum gain further in towards the end game of Wrath of the Lich King, then Troll is definitely the way to go. And there's nothing else to talk about Troll, so let's get on to the final race. Now, we all know Undead is a very popular choice among PvPers on the Horde, and not a great deal changes. You still have Cannibalize, so in TBC at the moment, it's a 2-minute cooldown, and when activated, it regenerates 7% of your total health every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. And it only works on humanoids or undead corpses within 5 yards. Any movement, action, or damage taken while cannibalizing will cancel the effect. In Wrath of the Lich King, it hasn't changed. Much like the other races, Shadow Resistance at the moment, you get increased by 10, whereas in Wrath of the Lich King, it actually reduces the chance that you'll be hit by shadow spells by 2%. Underwater breathing in TBC just increases your breath by 300% longer than normal. In Wrath of the Lich King, it's seen a very minor nerf, so it's now only 233%. Just in case you're wondering why, that's because actually in 3.0.2, so in Wrath pre-patch, everybody's underwater breathing was increased to 3 minutes from 60 seconds. So it got a minor nerf, but everyone's breath went up, so doesn't really matter. And then really the only one you care about, Will of the Forsaken. So at the moment in TBC, it's a 2-minute cooldown, which provides immunity to Charm, Fear, and Sleep while active. May also be used while already afflicted by Charm, Fear, or Sleep, so it breaks you out and gives you 5 seconds of immunity. In Wrath of the Lich King, it removes any Charm, Fear, and Sleep effects. It also shares a 45-second cooldown with other similar effects and has a 2-minute cooldown. So you no longer get the immunity, but as an undead, it's worth using a PvP trinket at the same time because it only goes on a 45-second cooldown. Or don't use a PvP trinket, entirely up to you. But it will not put the other similar effect on a full 2-minute cooldown. That one didn't seem to take very long, but that's about it. So, skip straight to the end, didn't watch any of it. If you did that, then I'll tell you now, most DPS at endgame, no matter what, whether you're melee or range, Troll's probably going to be the strongest. Early on, Orc's probably going to be the strongest. And for certain classes, like if you was a BM hunter, Orc may remain the strongest all the way through, but BM hunters, don't see that many of them. PvP, Blood Elves, very strong. Having that interrupt is nice. Even Tauren in PvP, you may look at what they actually get racially and be like, that's rubbish. A good War Stomp combo really can make or break an arena fight, so you might want to bear that in mind. But overall, not that much changes when it comes to the Horde racials, to be honest. A lot more for the Alliance. If you enjoyed the video, please do subscribe to the channel for lots and lots more future content, and I'll see you on the next one. Oh, maybe like and drop a comment, whatever. Tell me I look fat. I don't know, anything you want, but peace out.